Bill was a great enthusiast and lover of the history of drawing, as well as drawing as an act of inquiry and exploration of the outer world and the inner world. And this particular drawing reminds me of some of the things when I first met him, and he was dissolving form, and the relation when a form, when a figure is a figure and when it's part of the background, whether it's linked to it by shadow or by separated from it by color or by line, is something that interests him a great deal. But I think particularly about drawing, and figurative drawing in particular, is what he called the float of the far eye. And if you can take a close-up on this drawing, you'll notice that if we come down the center line of the face, that eye feels like it recedes back almost to be seen as a profile eye looking in that direction. And if I move this eye is on a frontal plane coming here. And if we take it away, suddenly we've got this break in space that happens unnoticed on the face, just as unnoticed as we move from the background onto figure. We know this is figure and that's background just because of this contour line. Now this line is on the form. We're going to see a line later on that is on the form and then drops behind. But so this is a rich language of drawing at just a young age in his life. By the way, these early drawings all have a kind of atmosphere. I should also point out that this dark shape cuts under the form here, and so that brings this plane, and we understand that we're moving across a flat plane that holds the model's figure. But this gestural mark down here becomes pubic hair. And yet unless we really stop to say, well, when is a mark one thing and when is it another, that this is just part, it goes unnoticed, both by the viewer and to some extent by the artist, except the artist later on will say, well, what is the difference in those marks? When is it just a mark and when is it, say, a thigh? Let's take a look at this next drawing. And the thing that's interesting with this set of drawings from the early 60s in Bill's work is that there's an atmosphere and there's light and space and a kind of a tangible, maybe not quite as moist as a Dutch landscape painter, but there's an air in them. And some of those later paintings, as we'll see, there's a change in the atmosphere, but this is an objective space. Now some of these marks, a change that happens from there to here. Some of these marks are marks on the page. And sometimes a mark turns into a forearm and lets go. And sometimes it rides along a hand. But now he's beginning to erase out and use the erasure or the negative mark, the white of the paper being restored just as forcefully as the piece in itself. Now he's still working with figures that we would all recognize. These are in something like normal proportion. They fit well within a tradition of classical figure drawing. The drawing that interestingly breaks the sequence for me is this particular one, and it's been likened, or the association of de Kooning is not far behind because the space totally fragments. And the thing that I've wondered on looking at this drawing is what was going on with Bill. This is the only drawing in the show in which the form is fragmented in a cubist way, and the space is fragmented almost in a field painter, action painter kind of way, that everything is on the surface. There's pieces of figures here and there. The face is relatively intact. There's a bit of a gesture of a hand. We can pick up a hand in here, almost a suggestion of modeling coming down the arm. So these are all things that signify elements in the drawing that correlate to things in our real world and real time and real space. But other things, like the angular break of these marks, is he looking for a connection? Is he letting the line travel around to find out where he's going to connect with the figure? Is he using the line with this line here serving as the shading underneath the bed, or the gestural marks beneath the bed did in the previous drawing, hold the foreground and move us back to that background and catch the figure in between the space? That looks pretty plausible to me as I look at the drawing right now, that the marks begin to delineate the space, and then he moves in and catches part of the figure to move around. One would have to say about Bill Brice that he's always experimenting in his drawings in a way that I think even surprised himself. I think that there was a gestation always going on in his mind, and it would come up on the drawings and he would follow that on the drawings. This next drawing brings up another point that is wonderful, and I'm smiling because I'm recalling Bill saying as much in a show, and we'd often go to the Getty to a drawing show, or we'd go to the Hammer, or whoever had a drawing show, we would go see the show. And I'm going to just use this one. We're going to need another close-up. You'd say, now you see that? That's a mark. That's another mark. That's a shoulder. That's a breast. That's representing a shoulder. That's a breast. So he felt that something could get a vividness and a reality, almost a one-to-one match of things out here in this world. And obviously Bill Brice isn't the only one to feel that way. There wouldn't be such concern about censorship and when an image is real and when it's just a drawing. But the transition between the thing being a mark and being a signifying of something, and then actually being seemingly as real as the form in life, is something that ran through all of Bill's work. Now, this is a great hanging of these shows, this set of drawings, because there's a background element that's brought in, and it's no longer just a figure reclining on a mattress or on a bed or a divan, but there's a window back there, and by gosh, there's something outside. And it looks like those marks have been erased out, and then they've been redrawn and accented to give them a feeling of light on form through which we can see something. And by the time we move to the next drawing, it's almost as if the figure is sliding out of the picture, and the space of the window and a projection of either the shadow shape of the frame of the window on the wall, that we're in a space that's not as rational even as that first one. And I think it's where Bill moves into a subjective space that we're going to see in the next drawings. As far as the language of the mark, it seems to me they become less sculptural, less volume, less descriptive, and more expressive and probing about the figure. But I think there's a big jump from that drawing to this drawing, and we're now into I'm going to call it a subjective space, and pursue that in the next drawings. We're continuing the installation of drawings on this wall, but we're in another room now. And it occurs to me that a lot of times in life we say, we're in a different place now. And even if we don't want to be, or we do want to be, we are, and we are in a different place. And I think Bill Brice was in a different place when he did this set of drawings along this wall. And he's now moved from an objective, perceptual space to a psychological, emotional space. The model is still on the couch, and there's the window that threw the shadow. This room reads like a movie, so I'm glad, really appreciative of having the opportunity to just make up a narrative. This narrative has no relation to what Bill was doing, but I guess everyone's life is a narrative, and I hope he would approve of it. So now we're looking through the window at the model. He's left that space. It seems in a literal way, but also in an emotional way. And we have this figure in the lower left-hand corner. It's hard to think this isn't the artist himself. He seems to be agonizing over something. So there's a weight, or there's a burden, or there's a dilemma, and there's a path, but the path it's a rough path, and it disappears over a hill, and there's something on the other side of that hill. But back here are these two trees. I think it's Bill Brice's yard, and I think that's the model in the studio, but he's here now and wondering, debating, worrying, avoiding, inevitably going to follow that path. So we're in a subjective world, and the marks have changed character too, but they're no less rich and informed, despite the fact that they're no longer as descriptive or as observational as they were in the last set. Let's take a look at this next drawing. Well, it seems the model has left the studio too, and she's out into the world among trees and open air and light. I sort of wonder if this couldn't also be linked to some of Bill's later works, where they seem to be totemic and iconic and outside. But this young woman is more like Eve, or more like primordial or primeval state, just a very subtle gesture, some modeling on the figure, lines that are not facile and easily grasping form, but work their way along the form. But they're an arresting point in this drawing, and this is, I'm going to return to a point I made a few drawings ago, that Bill was interested in the mark that was, well, there must be a mark that's wrong or he wouldn't change it. But that isn't that wrong, so we'll leave the residue of the mark. And as he's exploring his way through this drawing, we suddenly come to this knee. Now that's a mark, and that's a knee. And he loved that in all kinds of drawings, where suddenly it was so vivid and so believable that it absolutely was a knee. It wasn't anything, that was a knee. But on looking at this drawing, again, I can see that the line leaves the contour and goes behind it. And if you can imagine, say, having a photocopy or a print of this drawing and filling the dark in behind this knee to make the point, you'd realize that, I think, agree with me, I hope, that this line has now gone behind the form and relieves the form and brings it forward. And the form really reads from that shadowed but still light edge across the knee into this edge. So it's another beautiful case of Bill finding things in his drawing that must have, we have the feeling, I think all of us that knew him well, that there were things that mystified him in his drawing and caused him to wonder about the nature of drawing and maybe to wonder about the nature of being too. The fact that he'll go from a shape as vivid as this. Now it does feel like he's drawing behind the shape here to me, even with the softening of this edge, to something as sculptural as volumetric as this knee is. Photographers would call this a full shot because the model fills the frame from the bottom to the top. But how about the trees? Because the tree goes out of frame. Now there's not one of us here or anyone looking at the drawing that doesn't fully expect that someplace up there there's leaves on the wall. But there aren't any leaves on the wall because the drawing ends there. But someplace in the early 60s, late 50s, Bill told me a story that John Brice, his son, was drawing. And he said he just came to the edge of the paper and he didn't stop. He just kept drawing. He drew on across the table. He drew down the side of the table, went across the floor. I don't know where John ever stopped. But Bill approached me, and you'll hear this from a few people. When he wanted to make a point, he would come right in on camera like this and say, "Isn't that great? Is that great?" He just didn't stop at the edge of the paper. And there was something in that Bill envied and admired, and it fascinated him about, well, we all know those trees go on, and if there's more paper, we'd even see more trees, right? Okay, but anyway, it's a beautiful, it's such a romantic and tender drawing. There's tender moments in other drawings of Bill's, but perhaps because this is tied to a young female figure, and perhaps because there's the way she's tipped her head, there's a quality of gesture that is so expressive about her mood that is a captivating and charming and enchanting drawing. Let's take a look at this next one, because I think it also comes out of the feeling of the model. Okay, while you look at this young woman sitting here, I want you to recall an experience we've all done in LA. We'll be stopped in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and you look over to the car beside you, and you see a person there lost in thought. And then you realize there's a whole ocean of cars of people lost in thought. And in a way, that's what Bill's captured in this drawing, that this model, who knows where her thoughts have gone. She's in this place, but her mind does seem to be someplace else, and she's reflecting or thinking or remembering. And we're back, it seems like we're back inside the studio. There's a window again, and there's a place, and there's some kind of marks on the floor. But the real subject of the drawing is the mood and the feeling of the model, and it's really, really beautifully captured. This is the last of the drawings of the subjective world. It seems to be the male figure that we picked up in the first drawing, outside, sitting. It's hard to not empathize with the gesture and the feeling in the figure itself, that it's impossible to move. And the figure's own right leg, camera left for us, is so massive. Are we either that close to it, or is it the psychological weight of the leg of almost being beyond articulation or control by the body? So the head sort of slumps over, and it's one of those moments that I think it's a human moment that we all have. It's like, God, I don't want to go out there and do that stuff today, but I just can't stay here, so I guess I better get up and go do it. But there's both a resoluteness and a stubbornness and a vulnerability and a sadness and a strength, and I think it's what keeps us going. It's a beautiful drawing. This whole set of that I don't stay with my imprint of calling it a psychological space, but they are among the most emotional and expressive drawings in the show, as far as I'm concerned. They're beautiful, beautiful drawings. This is a big jump from the last drawing that we saw. It's 20 years, and the young woman has turned into an icon, or fragments of an icon, and the trees that we saw have turned into columns. So, someplace in those years, I think Bill Brice went to Greece, and for most artists, it seems that's turning a corner in their life, that they find something in Greece and something also in themselves that perhaps they didn't know was there. The place is still littered with evocative fragments, and Bill's work became littered also, or inhabited by fragments. Here's some of these same marks. You can see that's almost the mark that served to get under the bed in the first drawing that we looked at from the early 60s. We can still recognize the proportions of a figure, but they've turned into the ideas of a figure rather than a description or a rendering. Also, another thing that changed in Bill's work that is fascinating is that he adapted part of a language of drawing, or adapted, I think is really the right way to put it. It became part of his drawing, where the mark stays on the surface, but plays to, on one hand, be a mark on the surface, but also to render form, so that this buttocks or this abdomen become rounded. We can see it effectively if we squint our eyes, but we don't really have to squint our eyes, because the diminishment of the mark as we move toward the light does the same thing. But it's a haunting level of abstraction, but the haunting psychological quality that is in Bill's work so often is still present.